Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We've got a lot to talk about. A little bit later, Paul Kengor will be with us as we talk about cultural Marxism. We'll also be talking with Sammy Rodriguez about his book in the third hour. But in this first hour, we're going to get into a couple of issues with Jeremy Dys, who's with us. And again, thank you for stepping in and sitting in this chair for a short time on Friday, and then joining Colonel Alan West in the host chair and then the co-host chair. So it's been great to have you here, and thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
It was a lot of fun. And I found out that if you get surprised like that, you get rewarded with really high quality brisket here in Texas.
So
that was a great little treat.
Well, I'm going to have to walk out more often just so you get that brisket. So we will get into some really important stories, but the lead story I might just mention is the fact that Donald Trump has decided to cancel the Singapore summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. If you look at the letter, it's written in a fairly cordial way, because it talks about, "I greatly appreciate your time, patience, and effort with respect to our recent negotiations." A little bit later, he's thankful for the fact that North Korea was able to release those 3 American prisoners there, and talking about that being a beautiful gesture. But to get to the core of the letter, it says, "Sadly, based upon the tremendous anger and open hostility displayed in your most recent statement, I feel it is inappropriate this time to have this long-planned meeting," and went on to say that, again, this is probably the good for the good of both parties, but to the detriment of the world, that it will not take place. And you got to know that Donald Trump had some input here. "You talk about your nuclear capabilities, but ours are so massive and powerful that I pray that God will never have to be used." That does sound like Donald Trump, right?
I guess so.
Yeah.
This has been a very interesting process to watch through the last couple of months, even going back to the Winter Olympics and the opening ceremonies and the intrigue that occurred with all that, the Kim Jong-un's sister being there,
Yes.
and then the historic meeting between North and South at the parallel there. It has been a bizarre process, and I think in the back of everybody's mind was, do they really mean it? Do they really want peace here or not? I think the president is right with these last couple of outbursts by the North Korean government, whether that is Kim Jong-un himself or the apparatus that is around him. I think those are probably one and the same, but maybe there's some holdouts still. I don't know. But it's just intriguing that this has unfortunately gone in, I think, the wrong direction. And I think the world hoped that there would be an opportunity for these historic talks. But like I said, my guess is most people thinking through the process clearly are going, yeah, but I still don't quite trust what's going on over there. So reminding us of the great adage from President Reagan, trust but verify.
Trust but
and
verify.
I think this is one of the ways to verify that President Trump has taken here.
If there's one person that's excited about this, it's Vice President Mike Pence, because up until this was announced, they were talking about something he'd said on Fox News and saying, if North Korea is not careful, it'd end up like Libya. And so then everybody's been talking about that, and even the North Koreans were reacting to it. Well, this kind of overshadowed that. But again, there are some that are saying, well, this is a victory for Kim Jong-un. But as I've said before, Jeremy, I never took it necessarily seriously. We've seen North Korea time and time again put some things on the table, pull it back. All he's really trying to do, I suspect, is try to remove the sanctions. And yet we've made it pretty clear, at least Donald Trump has, and I think most of the diplomats on the American side, that nuclear disarmament is the issue. And then if you want the sanctions to drop, that's how to get there from here. And I think he wants to have his cake and eat it too, have his nuclear arms and have the sanctions dropped, and that's just not going to happen.
No, you're exactly right. And there's a little bit of this that there's so much of a narcissistic attitude with Kim Jong-un that he's got to stay relevant and within the national discussion, the international discussion and intrigue. So there's an argument that could be made that he fabricated this whole process as a grand PR campaign for Kim Jong-un.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it was, actually. I don't know. But it is, look, there's been nothing lost in this process, right? Other than to say that President Trump has maintained the American foreign policy here that, as you observed, you've got to start with disarmament, and then we'll go from there. If you want to be a good player in the international field, you've got to show some goodwill in the process here. There's been some goodwill that's been shown, but this last move, I think, by the Kim Jong-un regime has done great damage to whatever gains he had made in the international sector.
And again, you're talking about a man who wrote a book called The Art of the Deal, and he's always made it very clear that if the deal doesn't look good, you walk away from it, and he has. Now, I've heard that there is weeping and gnashing of teeth from Foggy Bottom, which is the location of where the State Department is, because I think some of the people in the State Department wanted something to take place, a piece of paper, a signing, a handshake, something. And Donald Trump's just not into that. He wants actual results, not... And I think in the past, there's always been, this is, I think, what's going to be interesting. Kim Jong-un, I think, was assuming that we can say all sorts of bellicose things and we can do all sorts of crazy things and they'll still come to the table. Because after all, look what was said against the United States, even as we were trying to enter into a agreement with Iran in terms of a nuclear deal. Death to America in the streets, and we're actually signing a deal with a nuclear disarmament, if you will, in Iran. And I think Kim Jong-un thought, well, wait a minute, that's the way the game is played. I can say all sorts of mean-spirited kinds of things. These kinds of comments that he talked about, anger and open hostility, that's not going to keep you from the table. Oh, yes, it is.
Well, apparently he was waiting for the C-130 to land on his runway with a bunch of greenbacks in the back of it too, and that very well could be the issue there.
Yes.
He got eclipsed by someone else. But I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a really important point to have made here. There's the contrast you have between a progressive administration under President Obama and a more conservative one under President Trump. President Trump has said this is where the line is and we're going to hold to it. There was a bunch of fudging of the line with that Iran deal, and as it's coming unglued now,
yes,
it's shown to be a pretty big stinker for the United States on things. And so I'm glad at least to see that the administration has, with whatever desire for peace or to have even those that have dangled the Nobel Peace Prize out there in front of him, if he could, there could be a motivation to be able to pursue that and to compromise pretty greatly in order to get to that. At least there seems to be someone in the administration, whether it's the president himself, someone in Foggy Bottom or elsewhere, that is saying, hey, look, this is not something we ought to rush or take with any kind of simplistic view upon.
Yeah. Well, again, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to focus on some other issues. But if you have not heard, again, a decision by the Trump administration and very clearly by Donald Trump. As you read the first part of the letter, it reads more like somebody from the State Department until you get to the part here about the nuclear capabilities, and ours are so massive and powerful that I pray to God that they'll never be used. That sounds a lot like Donald Trump. As a matter of fact, quite much like some of the tweets that he has sent out. So anyway, that has been postponed and probably canceled. Maybe, again, there will be some attempt to bring it back up, but we'll see. And whether that takes place or not, we'll continue to follow that. But when we get back, we're in graduation era right now, and within these next few weeks, we almost always have some stories, and we're going to have one of, in this case, a valedictorian, 4.0, unbelievably talented young man. And Jeremy's had a chance to meet with him, and we have an article that was written by Todd Starnes. And as we know so often, it is just always possible for a valedictorian or a salutatorian or a baccalaureate speaker to talk about just about anything, but you can't mention Jesus, you can't mention God, you can't mention the Bible. And so this is the latest story. We're going to get into it in some detail. Of course, if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Ayan Hirsi Ali begins her commentary with these words. I was a Muslim refugee once. I know what it's like. She was en route to Canada to consummate a marriage arranged against her will by her father. At the Frankfurt airport, she fled to the Netherlands. There she learned Dutch and received a master's degree in political science before coming to America. Now, she has worked as an interpreter for abused Muslim women and also understands the Muslim refugee experience. And in the course of working with Muslim communities, she has found 4 different types of Muslim immigrant: adapters, menaces, coasters, and fanatics. Many Muslim immigrants have adapted over time by adopting the core values of Western democracies. These Muslims have become great U.S. citizens and are the type of people we want to welcome to our country. Now, the second group are mostly young men who she says are menaces in their homes and outside in public. They've been subjected to domestic violence and go on to commit it themselves. Coasters are a third group of Muslim immigrants. They usually have little or no formal education and will thankfully accept welfare and live off it, and also invite their families from abroad to join them on the welfare rolls. Finally, there are the fanatics. Those use the freedom of the countries that gave them sanctuary to spread an uncompromising practice of Islam. These immigrants are certainly the group we want to keep out of America. Her analysis of Muslim immigrants is necessary for our discussion of immigration. We cannot just assume that all Muslim immigrants will perfectly adapt to the American culture and adopt Western values, nor should we assume that all Muslims are fanatics. We need to find a way to welcome adapters, but also exclude those who won't contribute to this country. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jeremy Dys in studio with us today, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about a young man by the name of Sam Blackledge. And this is so typical. I guess I've been doing this broadcast for more than 30 years, and it just seems like when you get into the May-June time period, we always have at least one or more stories of individuals either that wanted to speak at a baccalaureate or at a graduation. Usually it's a valedictorian or it's a pastor or somebody else, and they can't pray, they can't mention Jesus, can't mention God. And here we have one more of those stories, don't we?
That's exactly right. No, it's I don't know how many more graduation ceremonies have to be ruined before school officials get the message that they don't have to censor the speech of their students. I mean, goodness sakes, it doesn't take a lawyer to figure this out. Yes. I mean, it helps, and it's job security, I suppose, for us. But, school officials can simply go to the Department of Education's website. And it's been there since 2003. It's not like this is new information. But in 2003, the Department of Education put out guidelines about constitutionally protected religious speech of students. And that covers a whole gamut between what they talk about in their school assignments and classroom discussions in the hallways, student groups that meet before and after school, during school, all those kinds of everything that it might cover. It's all right there in black and white on the Department of Education's website. One of the topics is the issue of speech at graduation. And it should be pretty obvious by now, but apparently, at least for some, that is not as clear as others. But Sam Blackledge, as you pointed out, is a valedictorian. It was a co-valedictorian in this case up in West Prairie High School. That's in Illinois. So if you go up to nowhere and turn left, it's right by that. It's really far out, but it's a great little town. One of the bread bowl, the kind of the heart of the United States, right out there. He's a smart kid, 4.0 graduate. And so Thursday, he finds out he's going to be co-valedictorian. He starts to work on his speech, submits it about 1:30 on Saturday, the day of the graduation. And this is just the past weekend. So 10 minutes before the graduation ceremony is supposed to begin, the principal comes to him and says, hey, I looked at your speech. It's too religious. We don't want to have a religious gathering here. We want to make sure that, it is whatever. You either need to take out those paragraphs, like 3 or 4 paragraphs that references religious beliefs, or just not give the speech at all. And Sam's trying to be a respectful kid, but this is his graduation ceremony. He's worked for years to be able to be this valedictorian. You don't just accidentally happen into being a valedictorian. Trust me, I tried. So you actually have to work at that, right? And so he's given that choice. He says, well, look, I'm not going to compromise what's important to me. I was hoping to tell my classmates something that's central to me and my Christian identity. I wanted to be able to explain that to my classmates as part of the reason for my success and to wish them well. And he wanted to talk about forgiveness and love and these concepts that I don't think any human being would have a problem with, let alone the most secular. But that was not to be be case. And so
didn't he offer, do you even have a disclaimer or something like that?
He did. You're right. Yeah.
And I'm not even a part of, this is my view, not the, because that's on argument. He's a state actor. So, that's an establishment of religion, but he's just a student, right?
He's just a student. But it seems like school officials forget what Tinker v. Des Moines set out years and years ago. The Supreme Court, famous decision. They said that neither students nor teachers shed their constitutional rights when they walk through the schoolhouse gates. It just seems that some teachers and school officials, rather, they think that maybe you go through the gate and you have them in here or there, but apparently that doesn't extend to the graduation ceremony.
Yeah.
But I want people listening to understand it does apply to the graduation ceremony. You can talk about your faith in private remarks. What the Department of Education has written is just what the courts have said. That is, so long as students are selected through neutral criteria, like a valedictorian, it's pretty neutral, and you're given control over the remarks, which he was, then the school officials can't censor that language based upon some viewpoint that they disagree with. And there's other great instructive language, especially in the Seventh Circuit. There's a great case called Hedges versus Wakanda School District. And Judge Easterbrook writes in that opinion that it seems like teachers and officials here, school officials, want to, rather than present a problem, maybe they would get sued for having religious speech on their grounds or what have you, they would rather just censor it so they don't have to deal with it. I think that's the best way to handle it. But the judge goes on to write, no, the proper response for the school here is to promote more speech, not to squelch the speaker. So like he suggested, he could have a disclaimer on there. The principal could have gotten up there and said everything that follows from Sam's mouth is his opinion only and is not the endorsement of the school itself. That's perfectly fine. It's pretty awkward, but it's perfectly fine to do if you feel the need to have to make sure everybody knows that this religious language is in the speech of the school, as if everybody thought that it was. He could just get up there and disclaim the whole thing. So anyway, that's what should have happened. We've now sent a demand letter to the school district and asked them to either meet with us and see if we can solve it. By the way, we're supposed to have a meeting yesterday in Illinois. And as soon as the superintendent found out that Sam was represented by us, she canceled the meeting. So I'd hoped to have that meeting, but apparently when he lawyers up, that sends a different message perhaps, or maybe the right message on things. So we've asked him, look, correct this problem. Let's not have to resort to the courts. I'd rather not have to do that. I don't want to take resources away that could be better spent on reading, writing, and arithmetic. But at the same time, we're not going to stand for the Constitution to be trampled upon, and we're willing to hold those officials there in Illinois accountable.
We had a school shooting that you're well aware of last Friday, and that was in Santa Fe, Texas. And yesterday I was just mentioning that out of Santa Fe you had 2 cases. You had one where the minister wanted to speak at a baccalaureate, and there was a judge there that said, you better not, because if you do, I'm going to put you in jail. Later on, that judge ended up in jail, but that's another story. And then, of course, that whole case about having a prayer before a football game went all the way to the Supreme Court. The problem, I think, Jeremy, is that we hear enough about some of these cases that because these teachers and administrators and principals and superintendents don't go to the Department of Education, they hear in the popular culture that you're going to get sued, and so they're just having that philosophy that you just talked about a minute ago, when in doubt, toss it out. Rather than have more speech, we want to have less speech. We want to prevent us to have a Bible club. We want to prevent a Christian from speaking in a valedictorian speech. And as a result, I think we're harmed by all of that, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look, we used to have this thing in our country called freedom, where you could actually talk and say things. In fact, that case I referred to, Hedges versus Wakanda School District, Judge Easterbrook makes a salient point in there to say, look, the school officials can't silence students because they want to express a different belief or a different idea. I mean, that's the whole point of the First Amendment, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is to make sure we have the space as a country to be able to have a variety of viewpoints. I may not like what that young man from Miami is doing in terms of the Second Amendment discussions about things. David Hogg, I guess his name is. But he's got every right to be able to go out and sound like that and say those things. And I would defend his right to be able to do that, so long as someone else can come back and counter it, too. But that's the point. The First Amendment allows for us to have these differences of opinion. But school officials, and maybe more broadly the government officials, and some of the culture itself seems to say, we can't have this level of disagreement. Everybody's got to somehow be pounded flat so that we don't have these ups and downs and differences of opinion, etc. No. The First Amendment allows for that space. Why? So that we could understand what is eternally important, what is the actual truth of the matter. That's why we allow that kind of thing to happen. If you want to put it simply, we allow the First Amendment to control so that we can protect this thing we call freedom.
Yes. What would you say to what some of our civil libertarians say? That is a look at Tinker versus Des Moines, which was really about protesting the Vietnam War. Well, that's okay, but there's something more dangerous about religious speech compared to other kinds of speech. And so that's the kind of argument I've heard. I suspect you've heard it as well.
And that's exactly why the First Amendment was put into place, to protect dangerous ideas that are important to our society. To this discussion about what is eternally true, what is important, what is the right things to be talking about. So, no, absolutely, the First Amendment was put into place to allow people to wear, as Tinker v. Des Moines, wear those black armbands in protest of the Vietnam War. But it's also put into place to allow guys like Sam Blackledge to get a 4.0 grade point average and address his colleagues. I mean, look, we could talk about this perhaps a little later on, too, but the president was just told that his personal Twitter account that he carried into the White House, that is his personal account, not the White House, not at White House, it's actually at Donald Trump, real Donald Trump, that apparently now is something the government can control and determine. Look, your freedom of speech doesn't change based upon where you are. You still have the freedom to talk about what you believe, even when you're on government property. Now, the school district could, if he was engaged in swearing or, something lewd or indecent, I think everybody understands why we might curtail that in front of that specific audience. And the Supreme Court has said that's perfectly acceptable under the First Amendment. But to put religious speech under that category of lewd, indecent, etc., or just simply to silence it because you're scared of the result, I think is short-sighted. Maybe they canceled it. Maybe they want to censor this because they're afraid of being sued by civil libertarians or whomever. But they need to be reminded that we can do that too. Yeah, and we will. I don't really want to, but we can't allow the Constitution to be chipped away at. Freedom only remains free if we're committed to being eternally vigilant on these principles of freedom that have so shaped our culture.
Well, let's take a break. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and we'll talk about that Twitter account that the president has, and also talk about how Donald Trump is reshaping the courts. All that coming up right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers, defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today. Jeremy Dys with us, and he is senior counsel with First Liberty. We have a link to the website, also a link to this article about Sam Blackledge and his experience there as a valedictorian. A very sad experience, by the way, I might mention, and we'll get into what that might mean over the next couple of weeks, because I'm sure we'll be following this case. And some of these cases last forever. I just sent in my donation to First Liberty, and it had to do with the Kuntz cheerleaders. I mean, they're almost graduated from college now.
Yeah, most of them have, as a matter
and
of
it's
fact,
like,
yeah.
oh my goodness, this has been going on for years. So, I mean, sometimes you just have to have some patience and perseverance on that regard. So, again, if you want to read that article, it is there. If you want to know more about First Liberty, it's on our website. But you mentioned something in passing. I'd like to come back to that. Does the president, as a private citizen and now as president of the United States, own his Twitter account, or does the government own the Twitter account? Of course, I think we know what the answer is, but talk about how that's become such a big issue.
Well, the direct answer is, or at least every common sense person in America would say, he owns it, obviously, as a human being, as a person. But a district court judge in New York has now ruled that he has established it has become a public forum. In that regard, the government can then it cannot act to prevent access to it or to. So here's how the setup was. You had a bunch of journalists that wanted to basically heckle the president through social media, and the president did what most people do on Twitter when they don't want to hear people heckling them at all the times. He blocked them, so they couldn't access and direct whatever at him. Now, look. My grandmother knows what President Trump tweets, and she's not on any social media, and I'm not entirely sure she has a cell phone. I mean, she knows because everybody's talking about the latest tweet from President Trump. You can't turn on Fox News for half an hour and not see the latest tweet by President Trump. And same for actually worse for CNN, because they're covering it 24/7. It seems
Yes,
like
yeah.
they have a live feed of his Twitter feed on their cameras at all times, and a little cryon at the bottom. But so everybody knows what's going on. It's not like these folks were unaware of what's the president is tweeting. He just did what normal people would do when you get to be
Block some
annoying.
people.
You block them.
Sure.
Right, exactly. That happens all the time, or you mute them or whatever. Well, the court said he couldn't do that anymore. Now, let's analogize this so that people can kind of catch this a little bit better. I think it's understandable. We would all agree that if you sent a letter or if there are a bunch of letters coming to the White House couldn't bar certain letters from coming there. Okay, you just take away the crazy ones like with anthrax or whatever. Of course, we understand that safety element. But we wouldn't deny people the right to be able to access to the White House through a letter. But what about Mar-a-Lago, his personal residence? Is he allowed to block letters coming from there? Well, absolutely. He's a human being. He's a person. He's a citizen. And we pride ourselves in this country of having citizen presidents and not professional kings and queens and whatever. He's still a private citizen at the same time. There's some elements that make him that way. That's the same reasoning here. Basically, the judge said that he couldn't even block letters from coming to his mailbox at Mar-a-Lago. That's not the holding, but that's the analogy, right?
Sure, it sure is.
So the question becomes, okay, what does this mean more broadly? Well, okay, does every federal employee, every politician that has a Twitter account, is that now owned by the government? What about, Ken Paxton is the Attorney General here, and he's got a very active personal Twitter feed, and he puts a lot of his own personal opinions on there. His religious beliefs pop out from time to time. I see that with Ted Cruz and others as well. Politicians maintain multiple different social media channels, including personal and what I might call professional ones. They put political campaign stuff on the political campaign one, and they put personal ideas on the personal idea page. That's just how. So now all those, there's no distinction between them anymore at all.
And that's a danger, because really what's at stake here is not just Donald Trump or Ted Cruz, but you and me, ultimately, a city council member, a school board member, or just anything like that. So that is going to be an important decision, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely will be, but it's not even that narrow. It actually gets worse, because we've just talked about two cases where this would be directly applicable. Because Sam Blackledge, the valedictorian in Illinois, was holding his speech on government property on that forum, does the government now have the ability to say they can now censor that speech?
You can see that danger.
What about the Kuntz cheerleaders, where they're wearing the uniform of Kuntz High School, that are on the football field owned by Kuntz High School or independent school district, but they've paid for the paper, they paid for the paint, they've come up with the idea, the message to go on these run-through banners. Who owns the speech? We believe it's private speech, and therefore the Constitution fully protects that private speech. By the way, the Supreme Court of Texas agrees with us. At least has held that once, and we're back there a second time now. But the reality is that if under this decision, if it remains true and gets spread across the country, I think there's a very real danger, a real possibility that both of those cases would be determined that could be government speech and therefore subject to the control and censorship of the government itself. That's frightening.
Well, and I was just in Florida, and not far at the first time when I was there from where they had this particular football field where they basically said that it's a government microphone, so you can't use the government microphone to have a speech before two Christian organizations, two Christian high schools playing football. So that's where
exactly
that leads, right?
It is. That's right. And it's another one of our cases, Cambridge Christian School. You're right. They want to just open their game with a quick prayer of the loudspeaker like they did at every one of their home games and some of their away games that whole season. And the school district or the Florida High School Athletic Association said no, they get to control that. Well, is that what we want? Is this where we've gotten to as a country, where the government gets to control everything we can and cannot say? It's getting close to that point. And the fact that we've had a judge now determine that the president can't press the block button on someone who's been a bit of an obnoxious to it. They haven't missed out on anything. They can still see the tweets. They could even tweet about the president. They just can't heckle him like they could have before on that particular medium.
Yes. Well, and again, I wonder where some of our civil libertarian friends and some of our liberal friends are, who in the past were always so upset about Big Brother and government controlling speech and the rest. Now, to be fair, there have been some that have spoken out about some of this and then end up in places like Fox News and get a better reception there than they do at MSNBC. But you do think that this is one time where conservatives and liberals, progressives, Republicans, Democrats all could agree on that issue, don't you think?
I would think so, but it ought to disturb every American that whether this is, the Sam Blackledge case or the litany of other high school graduates that have faced something similar to that in years past or even this year, or if it's Kuntz cheerleaders, or just it's the president's Twitter account. I think a lot of people would just wish that didn't exist. But it does. And it exists because we have lived in a country that is committed to a robust public square where people can have a broad discussion, that we can have differences of opinion. I don't know, maybe we've just become a society of helicopter moms and dads that seem to need to control everything and make sure nobody's upset and nobody's having a difference of. That's not freedom. And we need to get back to a place where we can have these differences of belief and still call each other neighbor and citizen and friend, that we can have that robust dialogue and allow that to result in not having to put one another in jail because we disagree with what they may have said.
Yeah. We had Lathan Watts on the other day, and we were talking about this case up in Minnesota. Even though it's spring up there, we still have some snowflakes, we found out, right? And it was one of the great lines in his message. Just before we take a break, let me talk about how to solve some of that. And it seems like it's being solved in part because some really good judges are getting put on the courts. And this particular article in the Washington Examiner said, with less than 2 years under his belt, it's really about a year and a half, President Donald Trump has managed to make a substantial imprint on the U.S. judicial system, one that could be felt for decades to come. And he goes on to talk about the fact that 1/8 of the circuit court judges in America have been appointed by Donald Trump. You can look at the fact that, and some people have said he's probably has transformed about 30% of the federal appellate courts in our country, which is one of the quotes from Leonard Leo, who is, again, one of those individuals. But at the same time, you have 80 Trump judicial nominees, including some people you know, who are still in the Senate pipeline. And so Chuck Grassley's tried to find some ways to move things a little faster. One is he's upset a few of our Democratic friends because they have what is called the blue slip, which is a courtesy that was done to say, well, you might know something since that judge is from your state. But the Democrats have been using the blue slip to, in a sense, become kind of a veto. And so he's decided to say, this is just a courtesy, so we're not going to let you hold up those nominees. But there's one other thing that people are suggesting. If indeed they want to have the 30 hours of debate, I've said before, okay, click, you got your 30 hours. That'd end real quickly, don't you think?
I think they should start that at about 4 o'clock on Friday.
Yeah.
And that's actually something that's frustrated me. There's all kinds of seats that are the Democrats are poised to lose. Something like 20 seats are up for election, I think, right now in the midterms. Why is Mitch McConnell allowing everybody to go back to the districts on Friday and Monday to campaign? We've got the people's business to take care of, including these judges there. Hold them in session, and if you don't like it, then figure it out between Tuesday and Thursday. But right now, there's business to be done. We expect you to work a 5-day week like the vast majority of Americans do, and many work 6 to 7 day weeks. So figure it out, guys. Let's go.
Well, and that's what they're saying. Maybe to postpone some of these breaks and actually have the Senate work the way the rest of us do. So going to take a break. When we come back. Also, something in the news, a very real possibility Justice Kennedy is about to retire. What would that mean? We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dys. Our national motto has appeared on our paper currency since the 1950s, our coin since the 1860s, and was first articulated as our motto by Francis Scott Key during the War of 1812. Recently in Ohio, a group of atheists filed a lawsuit against the United States Congress, the Department of the Treasury, the U.S. Mint, the United States Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and, for good measure, the United States of America, in a failed bid to invalidate the national motto from our currency. First Liberty Institute represented the American Legion in a friend of the court brief urging the court to dismiss the challenge to the motto. Thankfully, the court has joined 11 circuit courts of appeal and the Supreme Court of the United States in rejecting constitutional challenges to our national motto. If a court were ever to invalidate the national motto, "In God We Trust" would have to be scrubbed from the walls of Congress, erased from our currency, deleted as the state motto of Florida, cut off of the flag of Georgia, ripped off the backs of sheriff's cruisers nationwide, and bleeped during the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Not only would that come at an enormous cost to accomplish, it would come at a detrimental cost to our history and heritage as a people. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jeremy Dys in studio with us, and one of the other articles that came out by Melissa Quinn is Stealth Victory, Trump's Stealth Victory, Reshaping the Courts, and talking about the fact that the Senate has confirmed 21 of the president's picks to the appeals courts, and actually the pace has increased a little bit. As a matter of fact, it says in here after 6 more judges were confirmed by the Senate in the last 10 days. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said the effort is starting to bear fruit, and that's where, of course, he came up with the fact that 1/8 of the circuit courts in America have been appointed by Donald Trump and confirmed by the Republican Senate. But, of course, you have 80 judicial nominees in the pipeline, and that doesn't even fill all of the courts. And that's kind of a crisis. I mean, apart from the partisan issue right now, you've got some courts that just simply don't have as many judges to hear these cases, and that's slowed the process down dramatically, hasn't it?
Yeah, let's put this in perspective. There are, every year in America, there are 600,000 plus federal lawsuits filed. So that's the initial intro into the federal system. And those go to district courts around the country. So there are hundreds of those throughout the country, and there's a lot that are empty there. Every year, those 600,000 plus cases that are filed translate into between 50 and 60,000, or maybe more, maybe less, appeals that go up to the circuit courts of appeal. There are 12 of those throughout the country, and those judges have a pretty high burden because those don't resolve in a given year. They carry over from year to year. They take a while to go through. And so there's a lot of cases going on right there. I think I read a number one time. I may be off on this, but my recollection says that the circuit court judges carry about 400 cases per judge in a given year. That's a lot.
That is a lot.
And think
I
about
did not know that.
But then the Supreme Court of the United States, they only get between about, I think this year was 69 cases. Last year was closer to 80, I think. So between 80 and 100 is pretty normal for the Supreme Court in the modern era. So you're only having those, think about that. It's like 0.02% of all cases filed in a given year make it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. So the reason I kind of unpack that is to give it a bit of scale, for one thing. But there's so much emphasis placed upon the Supreme Court justice, rightly so. It's an important office. But you're dealing with that small and relatively minuscule number of cases that go through there. More than likely, your civil rights are going to be meted out at the district court level or maybe at the circuit court level. And that's where we see the most open judicial seats right now that are not getting enough, in my opinion, attention on the matter.
Yes, and again, so that's one of those issues. Since we did talk about the Supreme Court, this one coming from Guy Benson, in which he talked with a senator who said there's a very real possibility that Justice Kennedy is about to retire, and I'm told he wants to be replaced by a Republican. Well, okay, there's been those rumors going on for some time, but nevertheless, if not this session, certainly pretty soon, there are going to be some vacancies. If indeed there was a real health reversal for a Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or maybe some of the other individuals on the court, that could change as well. But that suggests, Jeremy, that we could have one of the biggest battles ever, at least since Judge Robert Bork or Clarence Thomas, over this issue, don't you think?
Yeah, it's interesting to bring up Bork and Thomas. There are Justice Kennedy actually got here as the third choice.
Yes.
Recall, and there's been ups and downs on his term of office there. But it's who knows what will happen here in the long term. I don't think anybody expected Justice Scalia to pass away as early as he did. Mm-hmm. We had expected and I think hoped for a longer relationship there at the Supreme Court. But God has different plans, and he knows the number of days that each man has or woman has on this earth. Who knows? Frankly, I think he may be the only one that knows whether or not Justice Kennedy is going to retire.
Yeah. But again, this would be controversial enough because he's a little bit of a swing vote, but can you imagine if it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg or a Stephen Breyer that steps down? Because then the assumption on the part of the liberals would be, well, you've got to replace him with another liberal, and I don't see Donald Trump doing that. And so we go.
That's where my concern comes in, and that's why these midterm elections are going to be very important.
Sure.
I think why Senator Grassley wants to move this process a bit along. He's even been quoted as saying, look, Justice Kennedy, if you're going to retire, get up and go ahead and do it. Let it be known so we can begin the process here, because I don't think we want to get in a position again of having to work down through the third pick as it was back with Justice Kennedy.
Yeah.
That's historically been a kind of a bad thing at the Supreme Court. The first picks have usually been better, but the bottom line is whether or not they're better or worse, it takes up time to have to go through those things. So you have to find one, nominate, they withdraw or are, have to withdraw for other reasons, start the process again, find one, nominate, pull out, find one, nominate, and then go through the hearing. It takes time. These things do take time to fully vet. And I mean, look how long it took for Justice Gorsuch to get in there and the amount of grandstanding he had to survive in order to be put on the bench, confirmed to the bench. We're going to see that much higher, especially as you say, if it's one of the liberal justices that decides to retire or otherwise leave the bench. It could be worse.
And mentioned third, I've always heard the phrase, third time's a charm. No, it's not. Not when you talk about it. You go back to, you got Hainsworth, Carswell, and then Harry Blackmun, who gives us the abortion decision. And you have Bork and Ginsburg, and then eventually get Kennedy, who gave us all, everything from same-sex marriage.
Different Ginsburg.
Different Ginsburg, I might mention. That was the Ginsburg who smoked marijuana, which now would not have been a big deal, but back then was enough for him to walk away. And so, again, it just illustrates the situation that we find ourselves in, and certainly one of the reasons why we should be in prayer about not only those who are going to be put on the courts and those 80 that are waiting around. one of whom at least one by the name of Kazmarek, who I think is one of the guys waiting for it, as well as some others. But you also have ones that are on the court, and I don't know if you saw that the other day, but I did a commentary on the first opinion by James Ho. And usually the rookies on the court, tell me if I'm wrong, but I assume your rookie sits in the back bench, doesn't come out leading with a right cross or even jab, and instead the opening line is, about the fact that we have this problem that oftentimes they're inventing rights that are not in the Constitution and ignoring rights that were actually in the Constitution by the founders. That's a pretty good opening line from a guy that I think will be on the court in the Fifth Circuit for a long time, and who knows, might even be in the Supreme Court someday.
That'd be Jim Ho is a good friend of the organization. He's been a volunteer attorney of ours for years. He's a good man. His wife Allison is also one of our volunteer attorneys, our network attorneys. He's done some great things. It does not surprise me that he would lead out of the gate with a strong line. He's not shy to be able to share his position on things. And the reason he's not shy is not just because he's got that personality to be, forthright, but because he's confident in the positions that he's taking. There's a guy who, University of Chicago, Stanford, smart individual, really intelligent attorney, brilliant Solicitor General of Texas, wonderful partner at Gibbs, Dunn and Crutcher, has done some incredible work at the Supreme Court practice.
And he's helped you guys at First Liberty, right?
Yeah. In fact, he's got a case of ours that is he was lead counsel on the case of ours that's sitting at the Supreme Court waiting for them to do something with right now. So who knows how that works out. But Judge Ho is a phenomenal pick by the president. Wonderful that he's been confirmed. I think, as you observed, he'll be there until he wants to leave or is elevated to a higher position, and there's only one place to go up from there. And the country would be well served. What an inspirational story he has coming to this country as a young man.
That's what I was going to say, too.
Just incredible stuff. This one of the first Asian American judges on the Fifth Circuit. Incredible human being, and will serve this country admirably into the future.
Who knows? Might be the first Asian American on the Supreme Court. And so before we're done today, I want to also get your comments about the fact we got Memorial Day weekend coming up here. And I know you got Stuart Shepard and some others going up videotaping in case they take that cross down up there in Fourth Circuit. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And I also know that Keisha Russell will be joining us, and she is with First Liberty. We're going to be talking with Paul Kengor about cultural Marxism, and we've got a lot more to cover. But if you find yourself saying, I want to read a little bit more about this, or I want to know more about First Liberty, or I've got a case right now in my kid's school that I'm concerned about, we have a link to First Liberty. It's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We've got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story, or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We've got a lot to cover. In just a minute, we're going to be talking about this idea of cultural Marxism, an educational opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about some things that we've talked about in the past here on Point of View, but we have not covered them. And this very good article that appeared in the stream by Paul Kengor is one that we want to get to in just a minute. By the way, it's a longer version of it as well that actually appeared in the American Spectator. But before we get to that, let me talk about my roundtable today. And that is, first of all, I've got Jeremy Dys, who is a Deputy General Counsel for First Liberty, a graduate of West Virginia Law School, and an individual that last week was a co-host and for a short period of time was even the host.
The only host. That's right.
Colonel Alan West showed up just a touch late, so thank you for sitting in this chair. We thought maybe an hour from now we'll let you sit in this chair again just to see how that works out.
You're going to be here still, right?
Yeah, I'll still hang there. I'll make it easier for you, and we'll be enjoying that conversation as well. And want to introduce to our listeners for the very first time, Keisha Russell, who's the Associate Counselor at First Liberty, a graduate of Emory Law School, right?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Kerby.
We will get into some of the legal issues with both of you in just a minute, but I did want to bring this particular article to your attention. It is the second article that is on our website, Cultural Marxism's Long, Happy March Through the Institutions. We talk about cultural Marxism from time to time, but this was, I think, one of the best kind of quick summaries of what it is. And so I thought it would be very good for us to have a chance to once again bring back to the microphone Dr. Paul Kengor, who is the professor of political science at Grove City College and also the executive director of what's called the Center for Vision and Values at Grove City. We've had him on the program talking about books that he's done about the Pope and about Ronald Reagan. Matter of fact, I think the last time we had him on, we talked about 11 principles of a Reagan conservative, and he has written this piece, which we have reprinted on our website so that you can read it, and I would encourage you to do so. So, Paul, welcome back to Point of View.
Kerby, how are you?
I'm good, and it is great to hear your voice once again. Educate us a little bit on this idea of Marxism. You know, most people have heard about Karl Marx and all the rest, but you want us to understand this idea of cultural Marxism, which I love how you start your article. If you do a Google search or you go to Wikipedia, they call it a conspiracy theory which sees the Frankfurt School as part of an ongoing movement to take over and destroy Western culture. But it's really not a conspiracy theory, is it?
No, and in fact, if you go to the website of the Department of Critical Theory and Social Justice at Occidental College, and Occidental College should ring in some people's minds, it's the alma mater of our previous president, right, Barack Obama. And there they talk about teaching queer theory, which is a phrase that's used now in academia. There are actual departments of queer theory, some universities. Gender ideology, critical theory, cultural Marxism. So, I mean, this is something that's actually taught in the academy. And typically in higher ed today, Kerby, they don't refer to it as cultural Marxism. They refer to it as critical theory. But it's really pretty much the same thing. It's not like a bunch of guys got together at the Frankfurt School on, say, May 25th, 1925, and said, let's invent cultural Marxism, right? But what they did then, maybe not that exact date, but probably a few years after that, a number of these guys, Wilhelm Reich, Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, later Herbert Marcuse, who would be the sort of guru to the 1960s New Left in America, is they took old classical Marxism, economic Marxism, and they were Marxists. They decided to fuse Marxism, Marxist theory, with Freudian theory. So they were actually Freudian Marxists. So just imagine, right, the most toxic ideas of the 19th century, Marxism, and the most toxic ideas of the early 20th century, Freudianism. And they created a school of Freudian Marxism, where the aim became culture, sex, education, and instead of trying to organize the masses, the proletariat, from the factory floor or from the farms and fields, their venue would be the college classroom. They would aim for media, academia, Hollywood, film, the arts. So they did this through culture rather than economics. And really, that's where Marxism today, if you go to the website of People's World, which is the flagship publication of Communist Party USA, if you go to cpusa.org, and I do this every day because this is my field, I mean, they're not talking about taxes and economics so much. They're talking about LGBTQ. They're talking about immigration. They're talking about transgenderism. They're doing cultural issues. And so you'll see today's Marxists are really much more active and I would say successful in the cultural sphere than the economic.
Well, and again, when we've talked about this before, there have been people that will call in and say, I don't even know why you're talking about Marxism or communism. The Communist Party only has about 5,000 members. I love at one point you say, yes, the Unicorn Party might actually have more than that.
Right.
But that's not the point, is that these Marxist ideas, even if we don't have as many communist countries theoretically in the world as we do now, Marxism is still alive and well on the college classrooms and in the various spheres of influence in our culture, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and really, Kerby, the first time that I saw a real stridency for redefining marriage, for what became known as same-sex marriage, gay marriage, I was seeing that in 2005, 2006 at People's World and the website of Communist Party USA. And that was what Barack Obama came out for same-sex marriage in that interview with Robin Roberts. I think it was the 2012 campaign. It was around March or May 2012. And then remember, Hillary Clinton, who had long opposed it, she came out for it right after the November 2012 election, right? So the Communist Party, they were way ahead on that. And the first time that I saw the phrase, not LGBTQ, but, are you ready for this? LGBTQIA+, all right? Which stands for, you got the LGBTQ, and then an I for intersex people, and then an A for asexual people, and then a plus, which just represents the other, 30 plus other gender options, or actually Facebook currently lists 71 different gender options that you could choose from. And so the first time I saw that label was again at the communist websites. And now I'm starting to see it at places like the Huffington Post and the Daily Beast. So in a lot of these really radical cultural ideas, it's including, I would add to this, legalizing abortion, which the Bolsheviks did first in 1920. Really radical legalization of abortion, or of divorce laws. Again, the Bolsheviks, early 1920s. This stuff was taking place in the communist movement before it was in the wider liberal left movement. And so to some degree, American progressives are always just lagging a little bit behind,
yes,
a few decades, sometimes a few years, the sort of radical cultural Marxists.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we will continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Dr. Paul Kengor. And again, this is a piece that I really do encourage you to get a copy of. Cultural Marxism's Long, Happy March Through the Institutions, about 4 pages long. Not only should you read it, but post it on your Facebook page or your Twitter feed and get some conversation going. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Ayan Hirsi Ali begins her commentary with these words: "I was a Muslim refugee once. I know what it's like." She was en route to Canada to consummate a marriage arranged against her will by her father. At the Frankfurt airport, she fled to the Netherlands. There she learned Dutch and received a master's degree in political science before coming to America. Now, she has worked as an interpreter for abused Muslim women and also understands the Muslim refugee experience. And in the course of working with Muslim communities, she has found 4 different types of Muslim immigrant: adapters, menaces, coasters, and fanatics. Many Muslim immigrants have adapted over time by adopting the core values of Western democracies. These Muslims have become great U.S. citizens and are the type of people we want to welcome to our country. Now, the second group are mostly young men who she says are menaces in their homes and outside in public. They've been subjected to domestic violence and go on to commit it themselves. Coasters are a third group of Muslim immigrants. They usually have little or no formal education and will thankfully accept welfare and live off it, and also invite their families from abroad to join them on the welfare rolls. Finally, there are the fanatics. Those use the freedom of the countries that gave them sanctuary to spread an uncompromising practice of Islam. These immigrants are certainly the group we want to keep out of America. Her analysis of Muslim immigrants is necessary for our discussion of immigration. We cannot just assume that all Muslim immigrants will perfectly adapt to the American culture and adopt Western values, nor should we assume that all Muslims are fanatics. We need to find a way to welcome adapters, but also exclude those who won't contribute to this country. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about cultural Marxism around the round table, we have Keisha Russell as well as Jeremy Dys and Dr. Paul Kengor. And Paul, one of the things that I did when I was in graduate school, since I sometimes spoke on the subject of Marxism, is I took a graduate-level course on Marxism from a socialist and a lot of Marxists in the room. We read Marx, we read Lenin, we read Stalin. We read someone else whose name might not be as familiar to some of our listeners, and that was a man by the name of Antonio Gramsci. You mention him in this article as well, and it seems to me that that is another good example of how cultural Marxism has made inroads into some of these institutions, even apart from things like the United States Communist Party. True?
Well, that's right, Kerby. In fact, Sam Gregg of the Acton Institute refers to Antonio Gramsci as the most dangerous socialist in history. And he was not part of the Frankfurt School because he wasn't in Frankfurt. He wasn't German. In fact, he was an Italian, and he was thrown into jail by Benito Mussolini. He actually died in jail in 1937. But he may turn out to be perhaps the most influential Marxist of all of them. And he pioneered some people attribute the phrase to him and others people don't, but at least in spirit he meant this. He talked about the long, slow march through the institution. And this again, these were the cultural institutions. And this would be academia, film, arts. The late Ralph de Toledano talked about how the cultural Marxists wanted to submit America and the West to, quote, an unrestrained miasma of sex, right? Sex, sex, and sex. And And that makes sense when you connect back to the Freudian element of these Freudian Marxists. And so I don't know how much Gramsci specifically was committed to the sexual part. That was probably more Wilhelm Reich and some of the other people from the Frankfurt School. In fact, I should say this right now so I don't forget. Very important point. The very phrase, the sexual revolution, was actually coined by a cultural Marxist, Wilhelm Reich. And if people are sitting in front of their computers, it was Wilhelm Reich who literally wrote the book called The Sexual Revolution. He was so far to the left and so radical that the Bolsheviks didn't like him. In fact, when he went to Bolshevik Russia, he came back and he complained in The Sexual Revolution that Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin and these guys were too reactionary, and that among other things, they were too anti-homosexual. He didn't like that. And Reich, I was just reading this book again recently in the last few weeks. He talked about erotic stimulation of infants, like stimulating the genital areas of infant children.
Sounds like Kinsey.
Of course, if you're that's right. That's right. If for people who know Kinsey, who knows some of Freud, this probably, I mean, it's weird, it's crazy, but this isn't something that you've heard the first time. And so Reich was too much of a freak even for the Soviets. So these guys, they went to Frankfurt, and then because most of them were Jewish, and like literally, I can't think of one who wasn't Jewish. They had to flee. They had to flee Germany under Hitler, or else Hitler would have wiped them out. So where did they go? Who in the world would accept a bunch of fugitive freaks of Freudian Marxism? Well, there was one college in the world that rolled out the red carpet for them, and that was John Dewey's Columbia University.
Yes.
John Dewey, one of the founding fathers of American public education, honorary president for life of the National Education Association. They brought him to America, and that's when these ideas came to America, came to our teachers' colleges. Columbia had America's largest teachers' college, and from there, they would take root and spread throughout the United States, and that's where they're working their ways today, and in such a way that most of the young people engaging in cultural Marxism don't even realize that they are, and would just look at you with a blank stare if you even uttered the words cultural Marxism to them.
Well, let's, if we can, talk about what's happening on the college campuses. Keisha, you've run into this both as an undergraduate and even in law school you ran into this, right?
I did. It certainly seemed like the conversations in law school, especially as it related to abortion, were very one-sided. And if you tried to present any sort of Christian viewpoint on that matter, it was almost immediately discounted. So I think that even sometimes when the discussions were led by a professor, at times I felt like there was, not a balanced discussion on the topic. It was definitely leading towards the idea that abortion was something that, or at least unwanted pregnancy was a condition that a woman found herself in.
Sure.
I never really agreed with that premise, so my comments sometimes were not taken as well as others.
I can imagine. Well, and Jeremy, the whole idea of a victim class, right? We would deal with that sometimes in politics and in law school too, right?
Yeah, and as Paul points out in his article, that is intentional, that we have to have this continual victim that is out there. So there's a need in cultural Marxism, according to the article, to create new victims all the way through the process. And that can be somewhat creative, it looks like, for the cultural Marxists. They've got to, since culture is continually changing, they've got to identify new and better victims for them to be able to portray. I wonder, though, if I can ask a question right to Paul, is Dr. Kengor, what is, you just heard Keisha talk about how as soon as you raise a kind of a countermanding view of cultural Marxism, if it has to do with religion especially, that is taken out as less than intellectual. Mm-hmm. Why is that? I think we kind of understand some of that within the classical Marxist idea, because Marxism can't cooperate with a eternal thought. Does that carry over into the cultural Marxist as well?
Well, yeah, and there's a lot to this. One phrase that I would recommend that you guys take a look at is the phrase repressive tolerance, and that'll pop up right away on a Google search. And that was a phrase that was used by Herbert Marcuse, who became the most popular cultural Marxist in the United States in the 60s. In fact, his most successful student is Angela Davis, who is probably the most recognized female Marxist in America. She actually ran on the Communist Party USA presidential ticket with Gus Hall in 1976 and 1980. And by the way, if Angela Davis sounds familiar, she was one of the 5 honorary co-chairs of the Women's March in Washington in January 2017. So she's very well known. But that phrase, repressive tolerance, that's where Marcuse defined tolerance as tolerating ideas from the left, but not tolerating ideas from the right. And if that sounds crazy and kind of not like true tolerance, it's because it's really not true tolerance, right? I mean, tolerance isn't about only tolerating things you agree with. That's not. It's easy to just tolerate the things that you agree with. But that's what they've done, which is why some people say, oh, cultural Marxism is where the whole PC movement comes from. Well, yeah, that's not quite right, but I see where they're getting at that, because that's a very political correctness kind of idea, right? Like Nat Hentoff said, tolerance for me, but not for thee. But what's really crazy about what Marcuse and the left have done with that, so they tolerate ideas from the left, but not from the right. Well, what's a shame is that if you're now simply a traditional Christian who's held beliefs that Christians have held for 2,000 years, now you find yourself by the left relegated to this category of right wing, right? Where you think to yourself, well, wait a second, I'm really not a right winger. I just believe in the Christian conception of male, female, and marriage like the way Scripture's defined it for 2,000 years. Why am I a right winger? but that's what they do. They'll say, well, you believe that, you're a right winger. So that's where this repressive tolerance gets applied. And Marcuse wrote that article back in the 60s. You can pull it out, you can read it, and that's kind of the zeitgeist of what's happening in universities today, even if, again, they're not familiar with a term like repressive tolerance or cultural Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
Again, Dr. Paul Kengor has been with us, and we have this article. It's about 4 pages long that appeared in the stream. And also there's a link to the longer article in the American Spectator. But if you wanted to find out a little bit more about some of the individuals we've mentioned here, Antonio Gramsci and Herbert Marcuse, and of course we just talked about Angela Davis, and then there's all sorts of various links. It's all available there. And if nothing else, an indication, Paul, why some of the parents out there want to send their kids to Grove City College or Hillsdale because they want to get something a little different than what you're getting in a lot of universities. So thank you for joining us today. We look forward to the next opportunity.
Yeah, good talking to all three of you. Thanks, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, have a roundtable here, and Keisha Russell and Jeremy Dys, and we have a number of other articles to talk about today, and we will do so. You can find those on our website, pointofview.net. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Keisha Russell, who is the Associate Counselor for the First Liberty Ministry that is existing, and Jeremy Dys, Deputy General Counsel for First Liberty Institute. And again, if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We might just mention that Donald Trump has canceled the summit meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and we've posted a couple of articles we're going to get into in just a minute. One about America's declining birth rate, and what does that mean? That's certainly an issue that maybe even relates back to this issue of cultural Marxism. NFL announces a new national anthem policy. We might get to that, if not this hour, the next. And I might just mention the next hour we'll also probably get into, well, it's graduation season, and you just know what happens there. You know, the valedictorians are told they can't mention God, they can't mention the Bible, they can't mention Jesus Christ. Even some of the pastors coming in doing a baccalaureate can't mention anything as well, so we're going to get into that. And we'll also have, interestingly enough, Stanley Rodriguez will be with us briefly. We're talking about his new book and also what he's doing in the political arena. So we've got a lot in the next 90 minutes. But let me go around the round table. Jeremy, let me come to you first. This idea of cultural Marxism is something I wanted to cover because it is something we've talked about in the past, but a lot of people think, well, Marxism is dead. It shows up in ways you would never have imagined. You don't think about Marxists talking about transgenderism or about being part of the Women's March. But I think this article really helps you understand how that connects up very well.
It really does, and I'd really commend folks to go to the pointofview.net and download this article and read what Dr. Kengor has laid out here, because what he's done is to identify, okay, look, there is this idea of Marxism that we recoil at naturally because we've been taught to say Marxism is bad, it's communism, whatever it is. And so we just kind of have an instinct to say, no, this isn't right. We shouldn't be a part of this. But what's happening with cultural Marxism is they're actually burying the lead. This is not what they don't say what it actually is. It may come under different forms of titles like socialism or democratic socialism, to use a popular phrase from 2016 and a certain presidential candidate. Progressive ideological belief, progressive liberalism, even social justice is a big watch term for these kinds of discussions as well. And what I found the most interesting is how Dr. Kengor has said that they knew, and I'm quoting from the article now, they knew, meaning those who would try to plant capitalism as the way of the future, they knew that the revolution requires a cultural war over an economic war. In other words, if they went head-to-head, let's just bring this back to the Cold War, if communism went head-to-head with capitalism, they would lose economically. They knew that. And so they had to do something else to create that conflict, to dissociate people away from the idea that worked, capitalism, into something else. So he goes on to say, certainly not America is not vulnerable to a revolt of the downtrodden trade union masses. It is eminently vulnerable to, say, sexual immorality and pornography. They wouldn't be able to resist a sexual revolution. That's why you heard Dr. Kengor going on and on about that, how that has been the focus. And as you come out of the article and kind of look around at the world around you, you realize this is actually true. They are actually trying to promote this idea and using this to kind of force people's hands, which then connects to his next thought on that, which is to say they have to have a victim class. Quoting again from the article, both classical Marxists and cultural Marxists see history as a series of struggles that divide the world into hostile and antagonistic groups of oppressors and the oppressed. Both seek out victim groups as the anointed group that will serve as the agent for emancipation in ushering in the brave and better world. Its consciousness must be raised, or to use the more recent popular parlance, you got to be woke.
You got to be woke.
And that's what we see happening around the world around us here. The culture is always changing, so we've got to find new individuals, whether that is wearing those famous pink hats from a year or two ago, or talking about transgenderism or what have you. They will keep on adding letters to that continual acronym that we're all so familiar with to be able to make sure they have these victim groups that are out there to it's not so much to give confidence to the idea of those acronyms or those letters, but to be able to force through a mindset, an ideology
underneath of all that supports that foundation and frankly undermines our freedom in the West. As he ends the piece, he says that's where they are confident they can finally take down Western civilization and its Judeo-Christian bedrock. That undermines our entire idea of freedom in Western culture.
And to illustrate that, since I have two lawyers here, just look at the day after the Supreme Court ruled on the issue of same-sex marriage. The next day, we're hearing about transgenderism. So it's like a lot of Christians and a lot of Americans probably thought, okay, if we allow same-sex marriage, then this whole issue about gender will die. It will be solved. Whether I like it or not, I won't hear about it anymore. The next day, they went to the next class. And as Paul Kengor pointed out the last time he was on the program, you can go to Cuba, for example, and hear them talking about transgenderism, homosexuality, and you would say, what would the Castro brothers care about any of that? Well, they saw that as a way to bring down Judeo-Christian culture. They can bring down Judeo-Christian culture, bring down the West. They can implement this utopian world. Keisha, any comments that you have about this whole idea? I've got some phone calls, but I want to hear your comments, too.
Well, just the idea of cultural Marxism, I think it makes it really hard to separate the truth from a lie when they sort of bury these, ideas and things that sort of tug at people's emotions, these topics like victims and the oppressed and these things that make you want to say, no, these things shouldn't be happening. But you really have to be vigilant in order to spot what's happening if you're not familiar with these ideas and the history and where they come from.
One of the things I say so often here, a point of view, is I want to teach you discernment so that when you read something in a newspaper or a website, you hear something on radio, even this radio program, or you watch something on television, you're using some kind of evaluation. But we've got some calls, so let me run to California real quickly. KNLB. Kathy, what is your point of view today?
Yes, I was reading the Imperium from the Hillsdale from David P. Goldman, and he was talking about China and Russia. And in the century of China, they had opium wars and stuff, which pushed them into a revolution. And we seem to be having an uptick of like drugs in this country being pushed, such as pot farms. And children being introduced to even psychotropic drugs. Is this a possibility those things are going on in this country to get people to move towards communism for the government to solve these problems like that?
Not sure about that, but I'd certainly say that just the idea of kind of sexual freedom and personal freedom, that fits very well, whether it comes from cultural Marxism, whether it comes from the existentialists, Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, and the idea that you have your freedom of your body and you can do whatever you want with it. So that allows for everything from prostitution to drug abuse to, of course, abortion. Keisha, you just talked about that a minute ago. So whether it's directly linked to it, it certainly has created a climate which allows for, I'm just going to use any kind of drug I want to use. And this ultimately, if you drug the society, makes it a little less likely to be able to think rationally. Don't you think?
Absolutely. I think it's just like, as I said, you really have to be vigilant. You really have to be able to spot the line. To do that, you have to, stay on top of what's going on and stay in Scripture and make sure that you can spot it when it happens.
I mean, look, the reality is that cultural Marxism or the classical Marxism, they're depressing. And so I think that the reality is that people turn to other things,
drugs and alcohol,
exactly,
and escapism and gaming,
escape from
whatever.
It all, exactly, numb the pain that comes along with these ideas.
Yes. Well, again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to New Mexico this time, KYCC, and Brian, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think this is a really important topic, and as much as we can talk about it, I think that we have to use these kind of conversations and debates to clearly share the gospel with these people who would call themselves transgender. I think if we just debate with them, then we never actually get to save the person. So I think we have to be cognizant of when we are debating this that it needs to be used to share the gospel clearly.
Sure. Again, the scriptures talk about the fact that we don't war against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. And I think sometimes we can get so involved in the political debate. And of course, we do here on Point of View so often that we forget the ultimate issue. And we certainly have done whole programs on evangelism. Matter of fact, Greg Laurie is going to be sitting in that chair in about 2 weeks or less, I think. And so we'll be talking about his outreach and his evangelistic outreach. And these are opportunities when you're talking about these issues to bring people back to the truthfulness of the gospel and the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and what's important about understanding this is that in order to have that conversation, they're convinced in their minds because they've been made to be convinced about their victim status. And so that is near, dear, and real to their hearts and their ideas and their identity. But that is confirming areas of sin that needs to be confronted.
Right.
And so that's why it's so important for Point of View to exist, to be able to point these things out, to think through them so that Brian and others can go back to their communities and have these discussions. Okay, now I approach someone that identifies with X victim class. I understand where he's at, or she is at. How do we reach into them with the truth of the gospel?
We're going to take a break, and those of you listening online will have a chance to hear Jeremy Dys right now because we have our first Liberty Briefing. We'll be back with some more phone calls right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dys. Our national motto has appeared on our paper currency since the 1950s, our coins since the 1860s, and was first articulated as our motto by Francis Scott Key during the War of 1812. Recently in Ohio, a group of atheists filed a lawsuit against the United States Congress, the Department of the Treasury, the U.S. Mint, the United States Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and, for good measure, the United States of America, in a failed bid to invalidate the national motto from our currency. First Liberty Institute represented the American Legion in a friend of the court brief urging the court to dismiss the challenge to the motto. Thankfully, the court has joined 11 circuit courts of appeal and the Supreme Court of the United States in rejecting constitutional challenges to our national motto. If a court were ever to invalidate the national motto, "In God We Trust" would have to be scrubbed from the walls of Congress, erased from our currency, deleted as the state motto of Florida, cut off of the flag of Georgia, ripped off the backs of sheriff's cruisers nationwide, and bleeped during the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Not only would that come at an enormous cost to accomplish, it would come at a detrimental cost to our history and heritage as a people. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Keisha Russell, as well as Jeremy Dys with us, and let's head out to Georgia this time on the Good News Network. Tony, thank you for calling today.
I appreciate you taking my call, Kirby. Well, anyway, like I mentioned to the call screener, it's like when it comes to what we're talking about right now, what the conversation is about. When it comes to the African American community, a lot of them are just really clueless to history. And you go to talking about the ism, socialism, Marxism, and communism, progressive, especially all this mostly came about since Obama mainly been in his office. This is when a real face on history has been put on as far as this country is concerned, and with the gay movement and all this kind of stuff. They go to talk about that, you automatically starts an argument, and they don't believe a lot of that stuff. You know, I said because you've been made to be ignorant to a lot of what's going on. I said that's the reason why. You know, I said families are so many black families now are split up even more. You know, in comparison to before. You know, blacks were already split when it comes to dad not being at home, but now it's got even worse. And people say, well, you can't blame that on Obama. I said, no, you need to read a lot of these people's history and look at their mindset and what caused them to think the way they think. You know, ultimately, it's all got to do with the devil. But, you know, I said, but when it comes to us as humans, you know, I said, imagine if God made you black. Made you white, okay? I said, then you be wondering why people feel the way they feel about you. I said, but then you'll understand from their perspective. I said, they play these little mind games with us. I said, a lot of people have fallen into that trap. Why? Because a lack of knowledge, lack of what you don't know. I said, and that's what's going on with us right now in this day and age. So this is an excellent subject that you're all talking about right now. Perfect.
Well, Tony, thank you.
Yeah.
Keisha, I know you have some comments about that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Tony. I think, or at least for me, I feel like the history of blacks in America sometimes makes it difficult to, navigate that space and really understand those issues from, separating, again, the fact and the truth from what is a lie. And I think, sort of taking, the emotional charge out of it sometimes helps, and being able to reflect on it in a biblical way sort of helps as well.
Well, if nothing else, that is one of the reasons we do Point of View. And one of the articles we've posted here is by David French, good friend of this ministry. He's been in studio with us, and it's called, Does America's Declining Birth Rate Signal the Death of Hope? Tony was just talking about the breakdown of the family, the rise of unwed births, or what are called the illegitimate birth rate, or whatever you want to use as a phrase. But this was another one. We've seen that fewer and fewer Americans are having children. And so you need about 2.1 children in order to replace the population. Now, I've never seen a 0.1 child. You haven't either, but it's where you take all the children born, divide it by the women of reproductive age, and it should be about 2.1. Well, we've dropped below that, Keisha, rather dramatically. And as a result, what I love here is he says unhappy people make fewer babies, and Americans are shockingly unhappy. You know, Arthur Brooks has been on this program. The American Enterprise Institute has written a book about happiness. Dennis Prager's been on this program. He does a happiness hour and has written about this. We have a problem. Americans aren't very happy anymore, are they?
It certainly seems like it. I mean, it's something that you almost feel intuitively, the high rate of anxiety, the depression levels, and even I think it was incredible, this quote in the article, the average high school kid today has the same level of anxiety as the average psychiatric patient in the early 1950s.
Wow.
Which I think is just incredible. And even, as a former teacher, I can remember, looking at my students who were 8 and 9 years old, and they were so unhappy, and I just couldn't understand why they had so many worries for a child that I don't remember having when I was that age.
Yeah. You have happy boys. I've been with your boys when they've been around you. They look like they're having a good time in life, right?
I sure hope they are, and it encourages me that I don't see my kids moping around. They got their bad days, but they generally are pretty much on the upswing of things, and just frankly want to have fun. And with 4 brothers, I'm telling you what, they will make each other laugh as quickly as they make each other cry, but they seem to want to make each other laugh more often than cry, which is, on the whole, good. So it's good to see these guys having fun. It's interesting. I think we can make a connection between our last topic and this one as well.
I think so.
In that you were talking about how one of the points in here is that there's a declining interest in sex. Well, that kind of happens when things become saturated, right? When you've had such an emphasis on the idea of it all, when it's become so commonplace, you just simply begin to lose interest in the idea of sex as a whole. And because of that, I think that's probably why, at least one element of why we're losing this population replacement population that we need to have on these things. But it is frustrating to me, and as David's article makes a good point to say, that his line is, our nation faces a mental health crisis. And you may think that is something over there for those institutions to take care of. But his point is to say, this is happening in our homes. It's happening because of the news that we're watching. It's happening because of the lessons we're being taught in school. If something is going on, he doesn't really put his finger on exactly what the root cause of it is, but he's saying, hey, look, we got to look at this because we shouldn't have kids whose only care in life is to go to school and get good grades and have fun. They're coming home depressed as if they were a psychiatric patient from the 1950s. That should not be the case. Our kids should be, playing kickball, basketball, and having fun outside, getting dirt under their nails. Instead, they're experiencing unprecedented levels of anxiety and depression.
Again, this is where I think the Christian message can help a little bit. I recognize that Christian kids can be unhappy too, and certainly they are struggling when they just hear about another shooting that we talked about last week. But there is a sense in which right now the liberals have been writing about this, and now conservatives are. There's a gap because conservatives, and in particular Christians, have more babies than liberals. Christians have more babies than secularists or humanists, and as a result, there's a growing gap. You wouldn't know that there was a declining birth rate if you went to some of the churches, even around where we broadcast from. You would say that they are packed to the gills. So that's another issue. It used to be that everybody was kind of in the middle class, and now it's just separating out. You have the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor. You have the well-educated and those that are dysfunctional. You also have the happy and the stable and those who have dysfunctional families. And I think that's part of it as well, don't you think?
Yeah, I think we have to really recognize that we're triune beings, body, soul, and spirit. And if we neglect any of those things, it's going to show up. And I think that's what's happening now, is that we're starting to see what happens when we neglect the spiritual health of our citizens.
Exactly. And what David's point is in the article is to say, look, we see the manifestation of despair typically and sadly through the iteration of suicide and lives being taken. And his final point is to say, it's worth exploring this, whether or not this is due to our depressed state is due to a lack of children or having children. It's certainly a reason, he says. But then he ends with this. We know that existential despair can take a life, but it can also prevent a life from being created. That's a profound point. Those who are despair, those who are depressed, have a general view of the world that it is also of despairing and depressing nature. Why would I bring a child into it?
That's the point. And that's why you're seeing the difference not only in happiness, but the difference in birth rate as well. And so conservatives have more babies than liberals. Christians have more babies than secularists. And if you play that out over a generation, you see that changes the electoral map and a variety of other things as well. If it weren't for the fact that the universities, as we just alluded to, are real good at turning conservative kids into liberal kids sometimes as well. So we need to take a break. When we come back, Samuel Rodriguez will be with us. And first of all, he is the head of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference, has a new book out called Shake Free, How to Deal with the Storms, Shipwrecks, and Snakes in Your Life, which is kind of based on the story of the Apostle Paul. So we're going to talk a little bit about the book, which is just a fascinating book, but also just talk about, since he's been very involved politically, you might remember he was the first person to give the prayer at Donald Trump's inauguration, and I'll have a little fun asking him if that's a tradition in his family. I know it isn't, coming from a Puerto Rican family in New York, but nevertheless, we're going to talk with him, and then we'll get back into some other issues. We haven't talked about the NFL's national anthem policy, and we certainly have to talk about this valedictorian 4.0, but wasn't allowed to even mention Jesus Christ in his speech. We'll talk about that and much more right after this.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old, and I've been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story or call 1-855-335-2100. you could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time, first of all, talking with our friend Samuel Rodriguez, and then we have, of course, a roundtable. Let me just mention again of the roundtable. It consists of Keisha Russell, who is the Associate Counselor for First Liberty, and Jeremy Dys, who's the Deputy General Counsel for First Liberty. We're going to get into a couple of the cases. As a matter of fact, a very important case that we'll talk about a little bit later this hour of Samuel Blackledge, who 4.0 valedictorian, told he cannot mention Jesus, could not mention anything Christian in his speech, and we'll get into that and also talk about what rights students really do have on a high school campus and a variety of other situations. So certainly that will be something we'll be covering this hour. We've talked a little bit about cultural Marxism, the declining birth rate. We might get to, if we have time, the NFL's policy on the national anthem, but I didn't want to take any more time to introduce our guest, and that is Samuel Rodriguez, who is an individual you probably know. We've mentioned him before. He is the president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference and is also the pastor of New Season Church in Sacramento, California. Individual graduated from Lehigh University. I had a chance to hear him recently at one of the men's retreats, and you know him probably best as the first Hispanic evangelical pastor to offer a prayer at a presidential inauguration. Samuel Rodriguez, welcome to Point of View.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, let's talk about that very significant event, since you start your book with that. I would think that if people did not know you or did not know the book, they might say, oh, well, he probably comes from a long line of Hispanic family members that have actually worked with presidents and given presidential prayers at inaugurations. But that is not the case, is it?
No, quite the contrary. I'm just a Hispanic, I'm an American of Hispanic descent who was raised in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, a steel town, a blue-collar town indeed. I experienced the Rust Belt back in the 80s when I was growing up as a teenager, and that Calvinistic work ethic and the centrality of Christ. And here I found myself, by the grace of God, participating in a presidential inauguration. So it was an honor beyond words, indeed.
Well, we're a little bit later going to talk about a young man that was not allowed to mention Jesus. And I remember when I had, last time I had a chance to sit in the audience and hear you speak, that you had a question as to whether or not you were going to end your prayer in Jesus' name. Share that just briefly with us, because I think it illustrates, again, the courage sometimes you have to have when you're looking out in that throng of individuals and you know there are all sorts of eyes watching you, wondering what he is going to say. Take us through that, if you might.
Hashtag, it was a thing. It really was. I had a number of reporters, and one in particular, who asked, Reverend, are you going to mention that name? And it was, and I went,
that name.
That name? Yes, that name. And I went, what do you mean? Well, you know what I mean. That name hasn't been mentioned in a number of inaugurations in recent history, actually back to of the Bush's second term, and will you mention that name? And I said, well, that name, let's see. And I never even hesitated, of course. In my mind, I never even had a second thought. It was an automatic for me. I'm an evangelical. I love Jesus. I believe that name to be the name above every single other name.
Amen.
And it's the only name by which salvation can come unto all mankind. I'm never probably going to have this opportunity again to speak to over 1 billion people around the world. And I want to lift up the name that is the most transformative, healing, redemptive name in the universe. So obviously I prayed in that name, which happens to be the name of Jesus, by the way.
Well, again, I just wanted to share that. Jeremy, don't you like the connection? We're in a few minutes going to talk about Sam Blackledge after Sammy leaves. And
I do, except that I'm a little disappointed because I was hoping that Samuel Rodriguez would get sued for that and we would have a new client. But
it's a great line. Let me just for a few minutes mention your book, Shake Free, How to Deal with the Storm, Shipwrecks, and Snakes in Your Life. Samuel, first of all, it meant a lot to me because I've been actually teaching through and preaching through the book of Acts, and I'm really coming to the point where Paul finds himself in Caesarea before Felix and Agrippa, and then from there, of course, it is the shipwreck and all the other things. And so really what you do is you take us through that last part of the book of Acts and recognize the Apostle Paul faced storms, a shipwreck in Malta, then later a snake jumping on his hand and all the rest. But you use that in a very creative way to help us understand that many times when we follow the Lord, when we're actually doing what God has called us to do, it isn't easy, but God is there even in the midst of some of our trials and difficulties, right?
It isn't easy, and it is a meta-narrative. It is a metaphor for our current reality. There is a false gospel out there that somehow teaches people, which is absurd, that if you're a Christian, then you have this sort of utopic, world experience. Nothing bad happens. There's no pushback. There's no snake, proverbial snake. There's no attempt to strangle or poison your dream or your God-given destiny. And it's quite the contrary. We all go through storms, and some of us have experienced shipwrecks, be it family, relationships, finances, health-related issues. But some of us, even because we're lifting up the name of Jesus, because we're committed to biblical orthodoxy and the centrality of Christ, our Judeo-Christian value system, there are snakes that jump out of pits, and they jump out of the fire of the public sphere for the purpose of strangling the ability that we have and the God-given right to preach the gospel. So it speaks to the current reality in 2018, and hopefully and prayerfully, the audience will be blessed by this narrative that emerges from the life of Paul.
Well, again, I might just mention it's about 200 pages. It is published by Waterbrook. You can probably find it in your local bookstore, but we also have a link to Samuel Rodriguez's website. We also have an online link. It is endorsed by the kind of people we have on Point of View all the time, Ronnie Floyd and Robert Morris and Jack Graham and Tony Evans and a variety of others. And again, not only is it something that I think individuals can read for themselves, but one of the things that you do, Samuel, is that you also end each chapter with some questions that people can deal with and a possible prayer. So wouldn't this be very helpful for individuals if they wanted to do some kind of small group study or Bible fellowship or Sunday school class?
It's created with that completely in mind. It's created for small groups, discipleship classes, Bible study, Sunday school classes. It's created for individuals to gather around the Bible, Acts chapter 27, Acts chapter 28, and discuss Malta and temporary layovers and adversity when we're on our way to the proverbial Rome. There's a rubric I lay out in the book. Today's complacency is tomorrow's captivity. Complacency leads to captivity. To a great degree, the problem in America is not that darkness is darkness. The church has been too complacent, too politically correct. We're drinking the proverbial Kool-Aid. It's time for us to really rise up like Paul did in the midst of storms and shipwrecks, with snakes attacking and vipers attempting to poison, and really proceed with the advancement of the gospel of Jesus. So there is no such thing as comfortable Christianity. We are what we tolerate. And I know we're all waiting for Jesus to come back, but while Jesus is coming back, while we're waiting for Jesus to come down, Jesus is waiting for his church to stand up. We're on our way to Rome.
Well, let's again take a break. Let me just mention some of the other books by Samuel Rodriguez. Again, Be Light, so just an outstanding book, When Faith Catches Fire, and of course the one we're talking about here, Shake Free. We'll chat a little bit more about the book, but also want to get his comments about how Christians can be that salt and light in the world. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Ayan Hersey Ali begins her commentary with these words: "I was a Muslim refugee once. I know what it's like." She was en route to Canada to consummate a marriage arranged against her will by her father. At the Frankfurt airport, she fled to the Netherlands. There she learned Dutch and received a master's degree in political science before coming to America. Now, she has worked as an interpreter for abused Muslim women and also understands the Muslim refugee experience. And in the course of working with Muslim communities, she has found 4 different types of Muslim immigrant: adapters, menaces, coasters, and fanatics. Many Muslim immigrants have adapted over time by adopting the core values of Western democracies. These Muslims have become great U.S. citizens and are the type of people we want to welcome to our country. Now, the second group are mostly young men who she says are menaces in their homes and outside in public. They've been subjected to domestic violence and go on to commit it themselves. Coasters are a third group of Muslim immigrants. They usually have little or no formal education and will thankfully accept welfare and live off it, and also invite their families from abroad to join them on the welfare rolls. Finally, there are the fanatics. Those use the freedom of the countries that gave them sanctuary to spread an uncompromising practice of Islam. These immigrants are certainly the group we want to keep out of America. Her analysis of Muslim immigrants is necessary for our discussion of immigration. We cannot just assume that all Muslim immigrants will perfectly adapt to the American culture and adopt Western values, nor should we assume that all Muslims are fanatics. We need to find a way to welcome adapters, but also exclude those who won't contribute to this country. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pastor Samuel Rodriguez with us for just a few more minutes. And again, let me commend to you the book, Shake Free, How to Deal with the Storm, Shipwrecks, and Snakes in Your Life. It is available online, and we have a link to it as well. I suspect you'll be able to find it in your local bookstore, published by Waterbrook, and just a great resource for you. And again, not only that, he is, of course, the president of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference. Nick Pitts, who oftentimes sits in this chair on Wednesdays, was just out there in San Diego when they had one of those meetings as well. And I do want to spend a few minutes, Sammy, talking about how Christians can get involved in the culture. But I thought I'd share at least one story from your book that made me smile and I really enjoyed. And that is, you got contact with an individual on Facebook, and he says, "Don't you remember me?" And you're thinking, okay, I was youth pastor in Allentown. Do I remember this guy? And you're kind of struggling. And he said, well, you put a note in my Bible, and it made a real difference. And tell the rest of the story, because here is a good example of, you don't probably even remember sticking a note in his Bible, but that was something that brought him back to the Lord after he was struggling with so much pain in his life. And you use that as, I think, one of the more powerful illustrations in your book.
Right. No. And you know, you receive so many countless messages, right, in your inbox and your DMs. And truth be told, I initially went, is this person making this up? I don't remember this. But then I went back, and the details were too accurate. Where I served as a youth pastor, what years, the messages I preached, and so forth. And then I went, wow, the accuracy rate here is batting 1,000. And then again, in working with my family who still lives in the Lehigh Valley, I'm in California. But yes, it was legitimate. I inserted a note. And this person struggled with a number of issues, a number of very significant issues in life. And because of that connection and that commitment, that person gave their lives or rededicated their lives to serving the Lord and now raising a family committed to Christ as Lord. So, I'm grateful. There are small things that we do, and not just small, but to us, it may touch some initially. It may seem as insignificant, but the Word of God will never come back void. And sharing the gospel of truth and love and grace and hope to a broken world, it may take a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but the return on investment is second to none.
Well, again, I just think the application is you never know when you speak a word that will have a profound, maybe even eternal consequence. And it was just a great story in there, and you can read it in its entirety in the book. But I wanted to have you for just a few minutes talk about one of the things we're all about here at Point of View is being the salt of the earth and the light of the world, being involved in the political activities. And, of course, the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference is an organization, really an international organization that works with so many evangelical churches. Tell us a little bit about that and tell how some of our listeners might want to get involved with the work that you're doing. And more importantly, then I want to talk about how all of us can be salt and light in our community.
Yeah, by the grace of God, it's the world's largest evangelical Latino organization. It wasn't created, by the way, to create some sort of fragmentation and add an additional nomenclature with a hyphen. It was created for the purpose of uniting the Hispanic evangelical community to advance the cause of life and religious liberty and to reconcile Billy Graham's message of salvation through Christ with Dr. King's March for Justice. That was the purpose, to advance the Lamb's agenda. And the Lord blessed it indeed. And now we are international, and we have chapters all through Latin America, forming one in Spain, and mobilizing the evangelical community not to be silent, but to engage the political and the cultural sphere with our Judeo-Christian value system, to building a firewall of righteousness and justice for generations to come. There is an assault on Christendom. There really is. That's not rhetorical hyperbole. There's an assault on our Judeo-Christian value system, on eternal and moral absolutes. So it behooves our generation to work to be united, to come together as one church, one force, in order to advance the gospel of Jesus. So it's a wonderful organization and a great movement indeed.
Let me just mention that we have a link to pastorsam.com, which is where they can find some of that. But in your book, Be Light, I'd love to talk about that for just a minute. Of course, your new book out is Shake Free, and I certainly encourage people to get that. But Be Light is one that I think a lot of us know you for, because, again, you're just telling us that we're supposed to be the light of the world. And in a sense, it isn't that we're supposed to be it. We are. Jesus says you are the light. But sometimes we hide our light under a bushel, don't we?
Matthew 5:14 through 16, indeed. And it's that somehow the idea that we can somehow hide the light and cover it up. And why do we do it? I don't think it's done deliberately. I don't think Christians hide the light with the intention of hiding the light. I think we somehow acquiesce to fear. We are so obsessed with being liked and validated. Like. Social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Like. We are not defined by the likes of many. We are defined by the love of one. And we hide the light because of fear, because of political correctness, because we don't want to be called names. We don't want to be described as phobic in any area or category. And because of this, we've hidden the light. I do believe, and this is critical, that the moment that in America, for example, the brightest light, as you well know from science, is when all the colors of the spectrum come together. The moment we no longer speak about a black church, a white church, a brown church, or a yellow church, and we speak about one church, the Church of Jesus, the moment all the colors come together and the Church of Christ comes together in the spirit of John 17:21, make them one, we will shine brighter than ever before, because the lamp of God has not gone out yet.
So again, just before I let you go, let's talk about some of the resources. We have a Facebook link so that people can find out more about the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference. We have a link to your website. And again, I would imagine a lot of people can find this book in their local bookstore, but if they want to order this book or if they'd like to contact you or schedule you for a speaking engagement, how can they do so?
ShakeFreeBook.com, PastorSam.com, all the information is there. And again, it really is time for us to shine the light, to shake off whatever has come our way with the attempt of silencing us and quelching our commitment to biblical and eternal truth. We can make it to our proverbial Rome if we follow Christ and pursue righteousness and change the world around us in his name.
Well, Samuel Rodriguez, great to have you on the program and look forward to the next opportunity. Thank you for writing these great books, and thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me.
Let me just around the roundtable get your comments. You know, again, we talk about the need, Jeremy, to be the light of the world. And again, Jesus already said you are the light, but sometimes we just don't seem to be lighting the corner where we are, right?
Yeah, and that's an imperative statement. That's not an option if you are in Christ. That's something you are required to do. And so, and the purpose of doing that, of course, is not to shine the light on ourselves, but to, as Matthew tells us, to let our light so shine that before men that others may see the glory of our Father in heaven. That's why Christians are motivated to be able to shine that light, as it were. But there's also I think there's some in this country, and maybe there are too many, that are reluctant to shine their light, not because they don't know what they stand for or believe in, but because they've been shamed into making that light hidden somehow, whether that's being placed under, as the kid's song said, under a bushel, or if it's just simply they've withdrawn because they've seen other people stand up and had their heads slapped or cut off or what have you. You know, you look at people like Aaron and Melissa Klein, who have been, for their religious beliefs, or Jack Phillips for his religious beliefs, taken to court and fined thousands and hundreds of thousands worth of dollars, lost business and been excoriated. Aaron and Melissa have received Facebook threats and social media criticisms that are beyond the pale, wishing their kids would get cancer and die, and threats to their physical safety. Their cars have been broken into, etc. So the word I want to just kind of end with all that, and the point of my saying that is to say there are great protections in the law here yet for you in this country. And so if you are afraid of referencing your religious beliefs in public, don't be on the account that there's a legal reason to stop. Now, you may be afraid simply because there's a general fear of doing that. That's a different issue that you in your private time with the Holy Spirit and others have to settle. But if it's because the law may not protect you, that's not a good and sufficient reason to do so. The First Amendment still rules in this country, and you're protected by it. So we want to encourage you to continue to stand and exercise your religious beliefs in the form of the light that Sammy's talking about.
Well, again, we're in the midst of graduations and baccalaureates and all the rest. And every year, as I've been doing this program for more than 30 years, we always have some of these stories. And the one that we have in front of us, which we'll talk about when we come back from the break, Sammy Blackledge, 4.0. And just a short time before he was to give his speech, told that, well, you just have some paragraphs there that just can't be in the speech. So we have posted some information about First Liberty. We have the article by Todd Starnes, and we'll come back and talk about that with Jeremy Dys as well as Keisha Russell. All that coming up right after these important messages.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back with the final hour today. Keisha Russell with us and Jeremy Dys, and we're going to be talking about Sam Blackledge. And let me, first of all, Jeremy, let you explain the situation. We have an article by Todd Starnes about how Jesus was banned from a valedictorian speech. This is a really quality individual, and so tell us the story about him.
Very much so. Sam Blackledge is the valedictorian or co-valedictorian of his high school graduating class, or I should say was. He graduated last Saturday, so this was recent time here. Perfect 4.0 score in his grades, so that means he worked pretty hard. You don't just kind of accidentally fall into those things, and I tried, but it didn't work out quite so well.
Yeah, I wish.
So you actually have to do some work, I find, to be able to be valedictorian.
I'd say so.
Yeah, both of my sisters were salutatorians, and I was the apple that fell far from the tree. That's okay. But Samuel, get back to Sam Blackledge. He earned the right to be able to have this valedictory address. And when you do it, so he found out about Thursday that he was going to be valedictorian. He'd have this address. He submitted his script as he was requested. The principal sometime Saturday afternoon, right before the graduation ceremony, at about 5 was when that was supposed to start. About 10 minutes until the ceremony begins, the principal comes to him and says, "Sam, look, this is a speech we can't have you give here." And he says, "Well, why?" He says, "Well, you have too much religion in this. You got to back it down." And so there's a big discussion. He even says, "Well, look, can we just disclaim it? Say this is my language and not the school's, and be okay with that?" And no, it's too religious. We're not going to turn this into a religious ceremony. This has got to be a graduation ceremony. And so there's more debate and discussion back and forth. And they say, "Well, look, you've either got to cut the 3 or 4 paragraphs that reference your religion. We're talking about a page long. This is not a long speech here. You got to cut those 3 or 4 paragraphs to talk about your religion." And what is he's talking about forgiveness. And having integrity and things like that, but in reference to his religious identity. And so you either got to cut those things out or you can't give the speech at all. Now, that's an untenable choice for any high school student to be put in, but most especially the kid who's worked his tail end off to become valedictorian of his class. And so ultimately, as the co-valedictorian is giving her speech, which apparently was not centered, it was on general or generic topics of what you can imagine a valedictorian addressing. He's in the wings trying to kind of figure out a way that he might still be able to get his talk while maintaining respect for the office there. And they ultimately give him the chance to basically say, "Hey, thanks. It's an honor to be valedictorian." He sits down. His mother never gets to hear the speech. The only graduation he'd ever have from high school is now ruined. What I don't understand is how many more graduations have to be ruined in the country before school officials are going to get the idea, get the hint, to get the reasoning from the Constitution that you can't censor a student's private religious remarks. This isn't a new, novel, or weird concept. It is the basis of our First Amendment.
Well, and one of the things you've said before is now we have 2 lawyers sitting here. And, of course, lawyers know a little bit more about it. Lawyers that do religious liberty know a lot about it. But you just could read the Department of Education website and learn, can't you, what this is?
Right. We sent a demand letter yesterday to the Board of Education, or to the superintendent and the Board of Education there in Illinois, rural Illinois. They wanted to have a meeting. By the way, they called the parents over the weekend or at the end of the weekend and said, "Hey, let's sit down and talk." And when they called back and said, "Hey, Samuel and his attorney are going to be coming along here as well," they canceled the meeting. So I was hoping to have a meeting yesterday in Illinois with them, but they canceled it once they found out I was coming along. I wasn't terribly offended. But, you're right, Kirby. This is not something you have to spend hours researching or looking into case law about. You can just go to the Department of Education's website and read their guidelines for student religious speech and expression. Mm-hmm. They goes into great detail. By the way, this is not something that is new to this administration or last administration or even the administration before. This dates back to 2003. February 2003, this was first posted up there. And it talks about if students are selected through generally neutral criteria, valedictorian is a general neutral criteria, given control over the remarks, certainly did, then the school district violates the Constitution when they censor those remarks based upon a religious viewpoint that's being given within them. And it covers more topics, too, about what happens at football games and what about before and after school clubs. What about discussions in homework or class assignments and class discussions? Can you reference your faith in those? The answer is yes, you can. But the Department of Education has made this very clear. We outline that for the superintendent. My hope is that today she and the Board of Education there in Illinois are going to that website to see if I'm true or not, and we are, and knowing what the rights actually are. I hope we can resolve this matter without having to resort to the courts. We shouldn't have to do that.
That's right.
But I'm confident that we'll be able to rectify the situation. It's too late for Sam. His graduation's done, and it's been ruined by the acts of the superintendent. But there are going to be future graduates that are going to want to do this in West Prairie High School in Illinois. There are going to be future graduates throughout the 7th Circuit, Illinois and elsewhere in that area, and then more throughout the country. maybe you're listening right now, you're getting off campus, you're leaving, and you're preparing for your graduation ceremony tomorrow or Saturday or in the next couple of weeks. I hope you'll go to firstliberty.org, look at what Sam was going to give. You can give that speech. Sam couldn't give it at his graduation. We got a copy of it right there. Take it and use it. He's already said you can, or create your own. But don't allow the school district to tell you that you have to leave out the most central thing to you, your religious identity, when it comes to your graduation day.
We had Lathan Watts on just the other day, and he had put together a graduation speech, and there's even a video that goes with it. So, again, that's available. But, Keisha, let me come to you for just a minute, because, Jeremy was talking about something was in 2003. There was a case called Tinker versus Des Moines, and that's a case that came down before either of you two were even born. So that really goes back a long ways, back to the 1960s. One of your colleagues, Kelly Shackelford, did a little story about that he gave before the Supreme Court. So we're not talking about something that's new or novel. We have decades and decades, and we can talk about the Mergens case and all sorts of other cases that are out there that establish that students don't lose their rights when they enter through the schoolhouse gate.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's really well established, and it surprises me that every time this issue comes up, how terrified people are to hear students expressing their religious beliefs in school when they're fully within their rights to do that. And the Tinker case, as you talked about, does mention that and solidifies that, as does the Department of Education website in 2003, like Jeremy said. I mean, it's pretty well established law, but for some reason, people still think they can censor student speech just because it's religious, and you can't.
Let me just mention, let me open up the phones and give you a chance. Maybe you would like to comment on this. Maybe you're just getting as weary as I am about every single May or June we have one of these cases. But maybe also you have some questions, because you might have a young person that's going to be going through a graduation, or maybe there's a baccalaureate or something else where you have some questions. We have two lawyers here from First Liberty, so I'm sure they'd be glad to answer your questions. Of course, you can go to the website. You've got some great resource material there as well. The rights of students on campus, the right of teachers, people in the military. Michael Berry's put this together in your area of employment. So, Jeremy, there's just a lot of resources that I hope people will take advantage of.
Absolutely, including school officials. They can read and learn from this as well, so they know what not to do. But certainly, if you're a graduate right now and are facing something similar to what Sam has faced, or Mariah Bridges faced last year, or Brooks Hamby several years ago, or Angela Hildebrand, these are all cases we've dealt with in the last decade or less that have had to face these issues. One of them was even threatened with being thrown in jail if she actually used the religious language in her speech. Call us. I mean, these things they have a very quick fuse. There's only a short amount of time that we can help you out to make sure that your ceremony isn't ruined. But even if it is, we can still take action, if not for you, but for people that will come after you. Look, Ronald Reagan was fond of saying, and I say this, I think, every time I come to the studio, Kerby, but Reagan was fond of saying that freedom is not something we pass down through our bloodstream. It's not something that's common to our DNA. Now I'm paraphrasing. It's something we have to renew ourselves to, recommit ourselves to year in and year out, lest we forget it. You, as seniors, provide a pivotal role in that fight, in that issue. You, as a senior graduating, are going to be able to communicate something for the future. Will you allow yourself to be censored by the government, by the school officials there? And what will that teach to the juniors, the sophomores, the freshmen, and those in junior high on down? You have the opportunity to say, no. This is a bedrock principle of free speech and religious liberty in our country. I'm not going to give that up. I'm not going to allow that to be chipped away at by a seemingly innocuous action by the school district here. We're going to hold them accountable to the high standard that they are required to be held to in protecting this very important element of free speech and religious liberty.
Absolutely. And talk about what Jesus has done in your life. Share your faith, because I am a Christian because of someone I met in high school. And I will always be grateful, to her for that. And if she was being censored, I may not be here now.
Great line. Let's take a break. Let's take some phone calls if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. We did, of course, mention his speech that's on there. And then the one that Lathan put together is a hypothetical one. One of the other people that participated was Mariah, just mentioned a minute ago. Two of the individuals that were censored, actually, so you can watch the video. That's Stuart Shepard. He's got a future here in video. What do you think?
I think he might. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we all remember him from the Stoplight series, and now he works at First Liberty. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the fact he's going to be doing some videotaping up there at Bladensburg. And we might talk about why that is the case, but we'll also take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dys. Our national motto has appeared on our paper currency since the 1950s, our coins since the 1860s, and was first articulated as our motto by Francis Scott Key during the War of 1812. Recently in Ohio, a group of atheists filed a lawsuit against the United States Congress, the Department of the Treasury, the U.S. Mint, the United States Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and, for good measure, the United States of America, in a failed bid to invalidate the national motto from our currency. First Liberty Institute represented the American Legion in a friend of the court brief urging the court to dismiss the challenge to the motto. Thankfully, the court has joined 11 circuit courts of appeal and the Supreme Court of the United States in rejecting constitutional challenges to our national motto. If a court were ever to invalidate the national motto, "In God We Trust" would have to be scrubbed from the walls of Congress, erased from our currency, deleted as the state motto of Florida, cut off of the flag of Georgia, ripped off the backs of sheriff's cruisers nationwide, and bleeped during the singing of the Star-Spangled Banner. Not only would that come at an enormous cost to accomplish, it would come at a detrimental cost to our history and heritage as a people. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Been a busy day. We've talked about a variety of different issues ranging from cultural Marxism to the declining birth rate. One of the articles we have posted, we really haven't talked about today, the NFL national anthem policy, but you might want to see that piece there by Susie Moore, and we'll probably get into that later. But I thought it would be appropriate, since we're still talking about religious liberty, and I just mentioned in passing that Stuart Shepard, what a great job he's done over the years with those stoplight commentaries. There are some that just are so well done, and now works at First Liberty. But I understand he's going to be taking up his video camera and shooting the cross of the memorial for the Veterans Memorial there in Bladensburg, Maryland. Now, people might say, well, that's nice because it's Memorial Day weekend. Yes, but there's also the concern that that might be the last time that there will be a Memorial Day celebration at that cross. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, that's very true, and it very well could be the last Memorial Day for this monument that has stood since 1925 when it was erected, but in 1919 is when that was actually the idea. So next year will be 100 years from the conception of this monument, and it's 100 years this year from when the men that are on the side of that monument actually died in the Great War. In fact, many of them died. We've been doing some research on this. Many of them died in October of 1918. Now, if you remember your history, November 11th was 1918 was the end of the war. So many of these men died mere days from the end of the Great War, which is terribly sad. But it was their moms. It was their Gold Star moms that decided to put this monument together, and they raised the funds for it. One of the mothers, Martha Redmond, said in a letter to her senator that she couldn't visit her son's grave. It was overseas in Europe in Flanders Fields. She couldn't visit her son's grave, so this monument, in a real way to her, was very much his gravestone. And so now for almost 100 years, this gravestone has stood watch outside of Washington, D.C., at one end of the National Defense Highway, which was also dedicated to the veterans of World War I that connects D.C. to Annapolis, Maryland. And it stood there for years. In fact, in the 1960s, when this was standing on American Legion property, and it partly still is today, but in 1960s, it was the highway needed to be expanded. It was getting busy. There was an outcry. If they're going to expand it, they cannot tear down this monument. And so the city, the county, the state, they decided, no, we wouldn't want to take it down anyway. And so they left it standing. They routed the road around it so that they would be able to have that monument stay there and honor the 49 men that are fallen on that, marked on that plaque. And there it stood until recently when someone's driving by it and decided that they're going to be offended by it now. And certainly, Kerby, we're told that if we see something pornographic on a billboard or whatever, we're supposed to avert our eyes and allow this freedom of speech and expression to continue. But apparently it's so offensive to merely see the shape of a Celtic cross standing on the side of a highway, marking what is very much the gravestone of these 49 men of Prince George's County, Maryland. The Fourth Circuit has ruled that monument has to come down. In fact, during an oral argument, one of the judges said, it seems to me the problem here is the shape of this monument. Why don't we just cut the arms off? It was shocking. Oh, it was shocking. And if this decision is allowed to stand, just keep in mind, this is not just the gravestone for these Gold Star mothers' children. It'll mean that the monuments in Arlington National Cemetery, which is also within the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals jurisdiction, the Argonne Peace Cross, which was dedicated to the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, which is October 1918, is where those men were killed. That will have to be taken down. The Canadian Cross of Sacrifice, that'll have to be knocked over. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, here lies a soldier known but to God, that will have to be sandblasted off the side of that memorial. It's a World War I memorial itself as well. There are two men in Arlington National Cemetery who are buried under a cross in the green grass that is surrounding old Robert E. Lee's house. Those men are Robert and Teddy Kennedy. They're buried underneath the cross in Arlington National Cemetery. And then go beyond that to all the religious imagery that is on monuments all throughout this country, honoring the fallen. Look, they gave the last full measure of devotion for you and me. They have paid the ultimate sacrifice. We, the living, are the ones that are going to have to stand up and protect this thing. We forget things we do not see. Their moms knew that. And that's why they wanted their sons to be remembered by that memorial that would stand as a granite or as this cement permanent foundation right there for years and decades, and I hope centuries to come still from here. We will forget it if we don't see it. It will be I will do everything in my power to make sure that monument never comes down, even if that includes I have to stand in front of it until the bulldozers run me over.
Yes. The interesting part of this, Keisha, is that most people were not offended by it. Most people honored it, saw that as sacred ground. But one individual is offended by it, and then I just roll my eyes when they say, well, maybe we could just cut off the crosses. Well, that's offensive to me. And tearing down a cross that has been there for almost 100 years, why can't we be offended for some of these issues?
Right, and I just don't see the utility in moving it. It's been there for so long. It's only on government property now because of the building of a highway. So it's just, it just seems, it's upsetting.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point. I don't think most people realize that at one time it was on private land, but when they expanded the highway, then it had to be sort of government land. But,
the city took it, or the county took it by eminent domain. However, the American Legion, and this was founded on American Legion soil first. It was standing on what was private property owned by the American Legion. What happened was that the Gold Star mothers ran out of funds and inertia. And the men returning from World War I founded the American Legion. That's when the American Legion began, was out of World War I. They took over the effort and came alongside those moms. Mrs. Redmond, for instance, later would die in the 1920s of cervical cancer. So, I mean, you can tell there was stuff going on in their lives during that time. Anyway, they founded that. So when the city took it by eminent domain, the American Legion retained an interest there. And that's why on Monday, Stewart is going up to Washington, D.C., as well, along with a couple of our staff, because they've been holding memorial services there on Memorial and Veterans Day every single year since 1919.
Wow.
Think about that.
Yes.
So this is now a 100-year tradition where the people of Prince George's County will gather to remember their great freedoms. Keep in mind that that's the central part of what they call Memorial Park. So you've got the monument right there, directly across the street. For those of you who play golf, you can use a pitching wedge to very easily hit it, and a very light tap will do it. There's the monument to the Battle of 1812, the Battle of Bladensburg that took place in the War of 1812. About a 9-iron will hit you a World War I or World War II monument, a Korea monument, Vietnam, September 11th. These are all within a very short distance that you can see very easily from the memorial right there. And so there's all kinds of people gathering there to remember the ultimate cost that freedom costs us, and that we will never, ever forget those who have died defending our freedoms.
And again, just to illustrate the point that we've made before about the perseverance that we have to engage in, because a lot of people listening right now say, didn't First Liberty win a case in the Mojave Desert about a cross? And didn't we try to resolve one in San Diego? And here we are again. So that's why
right.
we have to support groups like First Liberty, and appreciate the fact that both of you are joining me today here on Point of View, and we're looking forward to having Kelly Shackelford in studio tomorrow. So, Keisha, thank you for joining us. I don't think this was too painful, was it?
Absolutely not, Kerby. It's my pleasure.
And we'd love to have you on again. And, of course, Jeremy, thank you for sitting in this chair. We didn't do a very good job of having you sit in this chair, but we'll do that again. I got so involved in the interview, all of a sudden I forgot that I was supposed to switch out, but we'll do that in the future. There'll be lots of opportunities, and thanks for joining us today here on Point of View. If you find yourself saying, oh, boy, there was a lot that you covered in the last couple of hours, yes, we certainly did. And the bottom line is that we have posted those articles. We have one on the declining birth rate, one on cultural Marxism, which I do really commend that you go and get a copy of, one on the national anthem policy, and then, of course, this wonderful story about Sam Blackledge. What a great young man, but what a sad circumstance he went through, and so that's certainly a matter of prayer, as well as we talk about what's going on in Maryland there to pray for that. And, of course, we have information about Samuel Rodriguez's book, so it's all available at the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Every big story in human history began with one person. Point of View Radio has sparked many stories during the past 5 decades.
I'm 25 years old and have been listening to Point of View for about 12 years now.
I can't say enough about how it's touched my life and changed me completely.
The effect was incredible, and it was immediate.
I mean, I've seen Congress turn around.
There was a transformation that really did take place.
Oh, you missed your cue. This is where your story belongs. How has Point of View made a difference in your life and your community? We want to hear your story, and when you share it, you'll automatically be entered in a drawing for an iPad mini, and if we share your story to inspire others, we'll send you a Bible stick, an audio New Testament that you can take anywhere. So tell us your story before June 1st at pointofview.net/story or call 1-855-335-2100. You could win an iPad mini, and your story may encourage someone else to make a difference. 855-335-2100 and pointofview.net/story. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.